Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day. And of course, the biggest political news remains the Trump trial in New York City. It has, of course, led to a lot of political theater. The main theater has been the Stormy Daniels. She finished testifying, and then Mr. Cohen came on, and there has been a lot of theater around that. Of course, he has lied in the past. He's admitted lying on the stand, but the prosecution believes that they will convince the jury that he is not lying on the key points of the prosecution. Now, he, of course, was the point man, or alleges himself to have been the point man between organizing the hush money around both Ms. McDougal and Stormy Daniels. And of course, the defense is saying that he acted on his own in a rogue fashion. He testified that he has been basically the right-hand man or the wingman for Trump for a decade, that he was the problem solver, that when if there was a problem to be solved as part of the catch and kill process that with Mr. Pecker, that if something bad happened, he was basically the man to take care of it. And a lot of real interesting theater. The defense, I don't know why they did this, but went through all of his tweets or his social media saying his insults towards Trump and say, did you say this? And he said, that sounds like something I would say. And did you say this? And just repeated all the insults. I don't know what the point of that was. If the point was that Mr. Cohen no longer likes Mr. Trump, they could have verified that. But it just had him repeating all these insults right in front of the jury. I'm not sure exactly what the defense's point was in that. But again, to remind everybody, and then I'm going to get your thoughts, Dave, is that what he's being charged with is a crime in New York, which is Penal Code 175.10, which is basically when you falsify documents, when you submit fraudulent documents in the furtherance of trying to cover up a crime. And it is a felony when you do that. There's a lot of confusion out there. You keep hearing commentators, particularly conservative commentators, saying, well, it should be a misdemeanor, but the misdemeanor crime, the statute of limitations ran, so they're trying to get them on a felony. It's not true. What happened was it's the underlying crime is a felony because they're trying to get him for the Federal Elections Commission charge, the violation of Federal Elections Commission. But even if they charged him under misdemeanor, it's still a felony if an underlying crime was involved that he's trying to cover up. Once the misdemeanor charge of falsification is for a completely different criteria that doesn't apply here. So I just want to say that there is a lot of misinformation coming out over the airwaves, particularly on right-wing media. There's a lot of people that just don't understand the nature of this case. And real quickly, I'm going to point out that when people say Stormy Daniels should not have testified, it wasn't necessary for her to testify, the defense made it necessary when in opening statement, they called her a liar. And so she had to come in to testify in detail in order to show that she wasn't lying, although it probably doesn't really matter whether she was lying, because the whole point was that she had a real sordid story that would have hurt the campaign had she not testified. Pardon me, had her story got out into the open. They had to catch it and bury it, and they had to pay her $130,000 to do so. I've got some more points to make about the trial, but really quickly, I want to point out that all of the vice president, not all of them, but a bunch of vice president candidates have shown up to the trial to show support, to attack the judge and the court system, which is, by the way, extremely inappropriate. This actually is a violation of separation of powers. It's really inappropriate for elected officials to be coming and commenting on a court process. It's interference. And we have Tommy Tuberville doing it, Vance, and then Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who's probably trying to make up for what he's done to show some bipartisanship. It's and so it's been theater. I have more to say about it, but Dave, I want to hand it over to you.
Thank you for that setup. That was comprehensive as always. So there's a few issues that you raised, and I think that the one of the primary issues you raised that's worth mentioning is what actually was the overall timeline, not timeline, but the strategy of the prosecution. What were they actually, when they rolled out these witnesses, what was the intention, right? And then how did some, in the last week since we talked about this last, what were some of the elements that may have, kind of added to their potential for success? So as you mentioned, David Pecker was the person who they brought out to basically define that there was an election fraud conspiracy scheme. That's what the allegation was, that this catch and kill, that the intention of making that hush money payment was to, in a sense, have an expense that was designed to support the election, have that conspiracy be hidden through the bookkeeping technique that you described of allocating it as a legal expense instead of as a election campaign expense. I think that's kind of a technical issue, but they wanted to throw it out there. Number one, that this happened, that it was ordered by Trump, that he ordered Michael Cohen to do it, right? So that's that second element, was that there was a cover up. And then so that in the cover up piece was the payments to Michael Cohen as a legal expense. That's where the false business records comes from. And so that these legal services invoices that were $35,000 a month for a total of $420,000, that was the direct result of that catch and kill scheme for the benefit of candidate Trump at the direction of Donald Trump. So realistically, I think that's why they had to go through the elements that they went through. And I think there was one piece of evidence that came in this week, which I think was extraordinarily important for the case, which was that handwritten document, Alan Weisselberg's handwritten calculation of the payment plan. And then the fact that Cohen says, Alan and Michael Cohen went over the numbers together on that piece of paper, and then they went to Trump's office, and it was like a orchestrated conversation that Alan Weisselberg and Trump had already had, so that they could get Trump's formal approval for that approach. And so now the question is, Cohen testified to this, that it's a piece of evidence that was presented to the jury. So the question is, does that story make sense? And are the witnesses and documentation credible? So we'll see what happens. I think that you pointed out that, Cohen, to gain some credibility for himself, there was a sort of a long, very detailed explanation of the Trump organization. And this is all allegations because you and I weren't there, right? So we don't know. But according to Michael Cohen, the Trump organization is led by Donald Trump himself, who carries himself like a mob boss, and that he values loyalty above all else. And, part of that was that Michael Cohen agreed to basically go to prison because of what he did following Trump's orders. And he said, he was, like I said, he was acting on behalf of Trump. He claims he regrets the lying and the bullying and the violating his own moral compass. He said, he's said his piece. Maybe he's credible, maybe he's not credible. But the last thing I'll say here before I kind of throw it back to you, Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, started out the cross-examination by really something very provocative, basically saying, "Hey, Michael Cohen, you've gone out there on social media and you've said bad things about me, right?
Yeah.
And then you've said bad things about Trump, and here's a photo of you wearing a shirt with Trump behind bars." Um, and so Cohen just basically went along with it and just agreed and just said, "Hey, you're not
Yeah.
basically, yeah, that sounds like something I would do, right?"
Yeah.
So that doesn't change anything here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was hilarious. He said, "You went on TikTok and called me a crying little S, didn't you?" And Cohen just said, "Yeah, sounds like something I would say." Blanche then says, "Yeah, and you referred to Trump as a dictator douchebag, didn't you?" And he goes on with this. I mean, and the jury is like, "Okay, and I mean, it's I don't understand what it is. I mean, if the point was to show that Cohen is biased against Trump and wants to see him go to jail, that's fine. But he did it for the longest time. Von Essen pants, I called him a racist. Jackass who referred to African nations as s-hole countries. I mean, just kept doing it over and over again, and everybody is like wondering, what is he doing? It's like, okay, you made your point, but he went on with it. And so he wants to basically show, but what he doesn't have is, other than being angry and not liking Trump, what is the motivation to lie? You have to come up with it. So he's trying to get at, well, that he's making an industry of it, right? He's got this social media thing where he's making money off of doing it. And I guess that's true, but he could make an industry out of also changing his mind. Probably make a lot of money doing that too. So it's just it's shaky. And Cohen provided a lot of details, kind of like Stormy Daniels did. When they were talking about the tape where he got caught saying, he likes to grab the parts of women. He specified that Melania said that, well, let's make it sound like locker room talk. And that accomplished a couple of things. For one thing, it sort of undermines the claim that this whole thing was to keep it away from her so that she wouldn't be, because obviously she knew about it, and she's talking about keeping that out of the campaign. So if not that, then why not this? And again, a lot of these details, if he starts to corroborate them, puts together a whole picture. So it's a complex case, and the prosecutor has to put together a real clear-cut picture of a very it's not a clear-cut crime, right? When you have somebody breaking an entry, you just have to prove some basic elements. But here, most people don't understand that paying off Stormy Daniels is not a crime. There's nothing wrong with it. It's that they didn't want to have to report it to the FEC, to have all of a sudden reporters who love to pull the campaign finance reports and start asking questions. Well, what's that money for? They didn't want to have to answer those questions, and so this is the jam that they're that he's in, because when you file documents that mislead, then it is a crime, and it is a felony when this is to cover up that crime. And by the way, for people who say, oh, nobody ever gets prosecuted for this, there's actually close to 10,000 people that have been prosecuted for this very statute since 2015 in New York State. So it's not something that is rare. It's a white-collar crime, and it happens a lot.
So I think there was a little nuanced point in here too, because like you said, people sort of downplay the importance of this crime, or they elevate the potential political nature of this trial, these charges. But one important piece, I think, because ultimately, you and I might have our opinions about those details, but that doesn't matter as much as there was some evidence that Cohen was trying to play out the clock a little bit with his with not making the payment. Like Trump really didn't want to make the payment, so they were trying, I think, to negotiate as long as they could without having to make the payment. And then finally, Stormy Daniels' representatives started pushing the issue, so then they
Right.
kind of fast tracked the payment. That leads to believe that they really did. Playing out the clock implies that Cohen testified that Trump said, "Hey, if this doesn't come out before the election, then we don't have to pay her at all." That basically means it's about the election. So
Right.
it does prove that point. I know we just have a couple minutes to go, and I didn't comment yet on the candidates, the vice presidential
Yeah.
candidates, and Trump loyalists showing up at the trial. They were in the room. That people were talking about how this was very much like a New York courtroom mob trial where the family shows up in support, and that these Republican loyalists were playing the role to the T, consistent with how Trump carries himself. There were people making that commentary. But so they were all wearing coordinated suit and ties. They all kind of were hitting the same talking points. So we're talking about North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Representative Byron Donalds from Florida, Vivek Ramaswamy, who wants to be vice president, Senator J.D. Vance, Senator Tommy Tuberville, Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas. They were sticking to the party line pretty solidly by calling the trial a sham, but they were getting around the gag order for Trump by actually making comments about the judge that Trump couldn't say. And in fact, it's been likened to counter programming to the actual trial, with their target audience being the right-wing media and the ecosystem that follows the right-wing media. So they had something to point to
Yeah.
about the trial, and including statements like, well, presumably citizens on the jury. I forget who said that, but basically was like basically undermining the integrity of the jury itself. And this could potentially defuse the potential that some GOP voters have said, hey, if Trump really is guilty, then it might influence whether I will support him or not. So it looks like they were trying to get ahead of it. There were a few reasonable Republican senators. Murkowski said this was ridiculous that these people
Yeah.
did this.
Romney.
And Senator Romney said this was very difficult to watch. So there is a little bit of a schism there in the Republicans, but it's a predictable split.
Real disappointed in Burgum. That he should not have done that, especially. The rest are a bunch of idiots, but really disappointed in him.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, so Democrats like to panic. And I'm not saying this poll isn't bad news or concerning news, but it is a poll. It's one poll. There are going to be a lot of polls between now and November. There have been a lot of polls. Biden has been creeping up in the polls. They even pulled ahead in some of the national polls and some of the state polls. He even was ahead by 6 points in a Wisconsin poll, I think a week or two ago. But a New York Times Siena poll came out within the past couple of days that is really concerning to them, and it covered, I think, about 6 battleground states and has Biden behind by 4 points with I'm not sure if it was registered or likely voters, but it covers the likely voters and the registered voters in all of these states, and he's actually not that far behind in the Rust Belt states in it. In fact, I think in Wisconsin with the likely voters, he was even ahead a point or two. Michigan, right? And doing okay. Pennsylvania a little bit behind, but where the red flares are coming up, or in the Sun Belt, Nevada way behind, like double digits. And in Arizona, behind by 6 to 9 points, depending on whether Kennedy's in or whether likely or versus registered voters, and Georgia significantly behind. And also concerning is that the Senate races in those same places. I don't think there's a Senate race in Georgia, but Gallego versus Kerry Lake, Gallego's actually ahead by 2 points. He's probably ahead by more than that. So, there is probably some skew in the polling. And I believe Nevada the same. And so there's some concern here that he is not doing very well. And we know that he has suffered a bit in his approval rating and probably the polls because young people are not happy with him right now because of what's happening in Gaza. And people of color have not been very happy with him either in the polling because of inflation, which actually there's a little bit of good news about inflation today, but I mean, it has not gone well for him. Regardless of what the economists say, the economy has not been good for most people, at least in their perceptions. As some people have pointed out in the stories, when we talk about cost of living, economists don't count increased credit card interest or variable rate mortgage interest as cost of living increases, but to the everyday person's budget, it does. It impacts them deeply, maybe even more than grocery store inflation. So again, groceries prices have slightly dropped and maybe will drop more, and maybe that'll result in some rate drops in September, and that might benefit him, and maybe not, if not too late. But right now, he is struggling in the polls. Is this fatal? No, but as usual, Democrats panic. You never see Republicans panicking over polls. But they don't believe it. It's the liberal media or whatever, at least not in public. Maybe they do in the back doors, but Democrats are freaking out over this poll. Now, there are some questions about its methodology, but I would say that, there's got to be some concern when you see the same people being polled with such big differences between Gallego and Biden. Is there the Dobbs effect that we've been talking about? Well, I don't know. Is that negated by Gaza because it's young voters who are really motivated by the abortion issue? Is the abortion issue kind of in the background now? Well, you can always count on the Republicans to bring it back in, but it's still there are issues with it. But this is my take on it is, yes, it's a concern. But geez, the freak out that Democrats come up with a single poll that is right now an outlier. If there are more polls in this in the upcoming weeks, I would say, okay, you got to do something. You got to think about it. But really, the message to Biden is you got to put some pressure on Netanyahu. And if you can't solve it, you got to at least look like you're basically condemning him. You got to not be soft on him. You've got to have forceful language. Because even though you've been withholding shipments and all that kind of stuff, you cannot be perceived as being passive with them. And young people want to know that you're being forceful in trying to keep kids from being killed in Gaza. It's just the way it is. Or you're just not going to win the election.
So I think that, your observation about the most recent polling from the Times Siena poll in these battleground states that you mentioned, big picture, it's one poll. So I think that's a great place to start, that this is a snapshot in time based on all, basically you would say when you're talking about polling, it's like all things being equal, and all things are never equal. So there's that piece of it. Much of the polling that we've seen to date has been national polling, which really isn't that significant because we don't have a national election. We have a state by state election. So the people saying, oh, Trump's ahead by a handful of points, within the margin of error or not. That horse race aspect of a national poll is really, you can discount that quite a bit. But this one is a little different because it is state by state and it is so important. And the numbers are quite shocking for the Sun Belt states, Nevada, Georgia, Arizona. If you look at those 3 states, that's on an average of about a 10% advantage for Trump. So that's I think the headline shock value is important there, just as an eye opener, if nothing else, for the campaign itself. And then the Great Lakes states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, if you look at that average, it's actually all within the margin of error at about, less than 2 points. So because Biden's still ahead in Michigan. So generally speaking, it's not a dazzling nightmare of a set of numbers, but it's indicative of a bigger problem. And the bigger, so you still want to wonder why is it trending this way? And so part of it is you could argue, and other people have mentioned this, experts, that in Nevada in particular, you look at Nevada where the swing is the greatest, where that's where Trump is ahead by 13 points. That's a big number. That population is diverse, younger, working class voters who have self-reported in these surveys, like if you read the crosstabs or read some of the reasonings behind some of the polling results, what they've said is that their issues include lack of access to housing, lack of access to affordable college. Overall cost of living has burdened their life, so much so that they question, is there a better life available for their children and the future? So it's about a general negativity towards the Biden administration's policies and a general negativity towards the trend of the country. And also, I'll say this one last thing, and then I'll kind of throw it back to you. I also agree that you pointed out that the fact that Senate Democratic candidates are doing well in these states, that split is also indicative of the fact that this negativity is directed towards national policy, towards President Biden's administration and life under President Biden. So it's actually an overall negative sentiment towards the status quo. You factor in Palestine issue, while people might not fully understand the nuances of it, as Hillary Clinton so infamously pointed out recently, people do understand the numbers, the devastation, the asymmetrical destruction, the barbarism, the famine, the potential threat to life, housing. It does seem that there is a problem there for Biden in a general. His decision to track more towards the older voters who are more strongly supportive of Israel, instead of maybe being able to, like Obama used to get out there and actually split hairs and say, hey, America believes in this, but there's this, and I'm going to tell you why. We can understand complicated issues. We're the leader for both problems. We're the leader for supporting our ally in the region, and we're the leader for making sure that we can help to fight for a better regional solution for the Palestinian people. That's not happening, and it's really hurting Biden with young folks. Even within his own administration, there's some defections, both in State Department and Defense Department. So I'll leave it there, but I do think that that these numbers are a canary in a coal mine, but they're not the be all end all, because it's still very early.
It is, and it's also right now an outlier, because I went to the 538, and you look at other recent polls in those states, and they do have Trump ahead, but by nowhere near as much as New York Times, Siena. And the rest, except in Georgia, it looks like they do. And also interesting polls conducted by John Zogby on behalf of, commissioned by Robert Kennedy, that has Kennedy ahead of both Trump and Biden. So that's interesting. I don't know where Zogby has gone for these years, but that's fascinating. But so it's. There have been some of the methodologies have been called into question of this particular poll and the rest. So, but that may account for 3 or 4 percentage points. I think Biden does need to take this and as a warning that he is not. It's not something that he should ignore, and it definitely needs to resolve it. I think the biggest issues are that he also does have the age issue. And he's done well, I think, to stay out of commenting on Trump's trial. I think he's, really just staying above board on that. There are a lot of conspiracy theories that he's behind this New York trial. There's no way that can possibly be true. But that's what they're doing. That's what some of the Republicans are saying, and that's why they're doing this show of support. But he does need to show that he's effective, though. And not a whole lot else to say. I think that if the Democrats, these polls are good news for the Democrats holding on to the Senate. They've got a problem in Maryland, but they also might have a small chance of gaining one in Texas. So it's real interesting that the Democrats are doing well, except for Biden. But we've seen that in the polling. The Democrats have been winning elections all over the country. Voters don't seem to be the swing voters don't seem to be holding their dislike for Biden against other Democrats, which is really interesting. And we'll talk about a little bit about that in the next segment, because as we get into this. But again, Democrats panic, but then what is it the Democrats want Biden to do? Move to the right? I mean, I don't think he can move much more to the right. If he moves any to the right, he's going to lose the votes that he's probably lost in these polls. I think they know that. Because that's the favorability rating. I think his favorability rating, a lot of the people that are saying they don't see him favorable are people who are probably going to vote for him. But they're just not going to say they favor him that much, because he doesn't come across as somebody who is decisively doing something. Inflation, he says it's corporations profiteering. Okay, so what are you going to do about it, right? That's what a lot of young people are saying. Make something of it. Do something. There also was an article, a poll they recently saying that people are just finally figuring out what the Inflation Reduction Act did to reduce drug prices. They're just learning that insulin is now affordable for people over 65. Why are they just learning this? It's just and why shouldn't everybody be knowing this? Well, if Trump had done it, everybody would know it. I mean, it's ridiculous. Well, he's kind of old school, but he's got to find a way to get it out. If he doesn't brag about it, his surrogates have to get it out. But there is still plenty of time, and he doesn't seem panicked. But he's just agreed to a debate, I guess, in late June, which is really weird because it's before either of them are officially candidates even. But he doesn't seem to be afraid of the debate. He does seem to handle himself well when he's under pressure. He's worse than when he's, doing interviews at times. But when he debates, he doesn't seem to have any problem. When he was up against the Republicans that were haranguing him at the State of the Union, he seemed to be at his best. We'll see. We'll see what he does.
It's really white rural resentment, which is a known, measurable, quantifiable term in the social science literature among sociologists and political science. It's been measured by people like Catherine Kramer in her book, The Politics of Resentment, about rural voters in Wisconsin. We don't really use the word rage throughout. We're talking about white rural resentment, which is a demonstrable and quantifiable.
In those clips, everybody remembers those, right? Because a Democrat said something that, taken out of context or clipped in some way, could be seen as really uncomplimentary to people who live in small towns or rural voters, and they got no end of grief for it. Republicans can say things that attack people in cities and the people who vote for Democrats all the time, and nobody ever blinks an eye, and in fact, they often get rewarded for it. You play that clip from Barack Obama. If you look at the whole thing, what he said was that people in small towns and rural areas have felt like both parties aren't providing them the benefits that they deserve. They're not helping them economically, and that's why they turn to these kind of culture war issues.
All right, we're going to go to a big grand issue question here. Is the country moving to the right or left? I want to start this off by saying, why is Trump so popular? And does this mean that the country is moving to the right? And the problem I have with that is Trump isn't even really a conservative. He adopts right-wing ideology because it's convenient to him, but it seems like the ideology isn't really, it's got conservative aspects, but the ideology is Trump. I mean, that's, so to say that there's like some kind of conservative movement, I mean, I talk to MAGA people and I ask them, what are the policies you support? And other than the border, and that they don't like liberals, trying even to get them to say what liberalism is. Well, open borders, that's what they have to say about it, and trying to, and letting trans people play in sports and a few odd things like that. They don't really know. I don't even know that they're all that much against welfare or even single payer medicine. I don't know that they know that much about what it is. They certainly don't read a lot of conservative, magazines or if they read at all. But in the meantime, we do have this movement that is occupying campuses. It's not really well articulated right now in terms of things. They unfortunately, a lot of the students are afraid to talk to reporters or debate anybody. They were ready to occupy buildings, but not really ready. I mean, what the right wingers is why they stopped talking to people is there's all kinds of YouTubes all over the place of see how stupid these college students are. They can't even find Israel on a map, kind of a thing. And which is why we really need teach-ins. That's what we did, what was done in Vietnam. Really need to prepare. But they are. This is a movement that is happening and possibly can revive what we used to call the left, what we call the left. But it's hard to know which way the country is going. We all are complaining about inflation. We blame it on one president or the other, or one tribe or one team building kind of a thing. But where are we ideologically as a nation? Where are the movements? Do we even have ideology anymore that's coherent? I'm going to let you take this on, Dave.
I think that last segue phrase that you used is a great starting point for me and my perspective on the question of is the country moving right or left, which is there really a coherent ideology? And I would argue that there's not. And that, when you go back, I'll frame this like from the perspective, I know it sounds a little academic, but the political philosopher Hegel has Hegel's dialectic. And it basically just means that there's a thesis, which is like the way things are. And then the pendulum is going to swing towards the people that oppose that, which is the antithesis. And that you start where you didn't want to be anymore. You start going someplace new, and you don't want to be there anymore. So you then have a synthesis. You have a little bit of both. You end up with a little bit more of what you want, but you still have this accumulation of the things that you didn't want. And that's kind of where we find ourselves, is that people generally, I think, used to like the whole sentiment behind Donald Trump, make America great again. People are patriotic. People know that most people have a general sense of the history of the United States, the role that it has in the world, World War II and afterwards, that there's this thing called the Washington Consensus, that the whole world economy and all the banking and all the trade and shipping and the United Nations is based here, and so the United States is kind of at the center of the system. But there's a critique, and so there's a critique from the left and there's a critique from the right. Start with the right. We kind of had this Tea Party kind of like, hey, we need more liberty, and the critique from the left is, hey, we need more, whether it's awareness about some of the faults, the historic faults America might have, like A People's History, Howard Zinn. You say, hey, like we were imperfect, and we don't actually teach our children, and we don't have appropriately diverse set of realities. We teach a narrative. We teach a nationalist narrative, right? So anyway, so that's my general 30,000 foot view. But realistically, where are we now? So when Bernie Sanders ran for office, he got a lot of support from across the spectrum. He got support from people who were on the sidelines and not even participating. You could talk to a lot of Republicans who said, hey, this guy is willing to just speak truth to power and talk about how to make this country better. I like his approach, but he was crushed by his own party, and he was sidelined by his own party, which is the Democratic Party. So that kind of explains how the pendulum would shift back to, hey, I'd like to flip the table. That guy wants to flip the table, and that's Donald Trump. So that
populism versus whatever cronyism or whatever is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and right now there is a dialogue about anti-populist dialogue. So even Hillary Clinton, not to keep bringing her up, but she's making herself known lately about her opinions. She's actually was involved in a debate recently where she was saying, "Hey, these populists are anti-democratic, Trump supporting. They are Republican leaning," and then she projects a little bit more. They don't know enough about history, and they're she projects a lot on right wing folks. And so the idea is that the Democratic Party likes to create I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but the idea is that they are a center right party that ignores the actual legacy and the traditions of populism that were, to a certain extent, a critique of the economic system. So we have a lot of economic similarities in this country. The vast majority of people are really frustrated about inflation. They're really frustrated about cost of housing, cost of food, cost of healthcare, cost of education. There's the diseases of despair that are wreaking havoc on small communities, all communities across the country. And that young people, we're talking about like drugs and those types of problems. The despair among young people is catastrophically high numbers. Like, we're not going to get into that now. But if you want something to be better, you're not seeing leadership out there, then you're going to find the person who is the most antagonistic to the status quo. And I think that we have a left antagonism and a right antagonism that are coexisting at the same time and that's why so many people are saying, look, I don't want either party's candidates in this presidential cycle. If you go to that, I'm not to filibuster, I'm sorry, but if you go to the poll that we talked about in the last segment, Biden only gets 30% support in Nevada, 34 in Georgia, 39 in Wisconsin, 35 in Arizona, 37 in Pennsylvania, and so only in Michigan is he above 40. So that means that he's the status quo candidate, and so people, if you look, RFK gets nearly 10% in all those states. It's because he's the other. So people are expressing, we just need some other candidate. And so that leads me to believe that there's not some ideological momentum to speak of in any grandiose way. It's really about a resistance to the fact that we have an extreme lack of leadership.
Which is a real dangerous situation, because populism is where extreme ideologies kind of take over. When people vote for people who are authoritarians, they don't pay attention to the ideology, at least not at first. They focus on the charismatic leader that is going to do this. They fall in love with the leader. The ideology comes later. Most people, I hate to bring this up, but it's just that this is what when you read about how figures like Mussolini, Hitler, Perón, and them came to power, it wasn't that people fell in love with Nazism. They weren't reading books about it and say, hey, these are great ideas. I want to adopt these ideas. They fell in love with the leader and then the movement and then the ideology if they bothered to learn it. It was, this is what happened. If something needed to be done, they were desperate. There was a depression. There was a decline of national identity. And people met him. Albert Speer talks about how he didn't even like Hitler. He didn't, he heard things about how he was an anti-intellectual and the rest. He started out as a liberal, but he met him in person and found he was a very serious guy, and he won him over because he was humble and and it was just and not at all the anti-intellectual ideologue that all of his liberal friends had told him he was. That's a real scary thing. I don't know that Trump would ever be that bad. It's just that that this is the scary thing. Or if somebody were to come along on the left and win that over. Bernie is definitely not in that class, but because he is a small d Democrat. But again, this is kind of a scary thing. Yeah, I don't think the country is going left or right because people aren't thinking in those terms. People are thinking in terms of, oh, I am well, they're not saying I'm a populist, but we need to shake things up. I'm going to start a dumpster fire, or we need to not let this happen because I'm scared. So that's kind of it. That's why you've got Republicans and people like Clinton on the same team. Why you've got the bulwark people and the rest who used to Liz Cheney and the rest who used to detest each other, now on the same team saying, hey, we need to keep the institutions going. And so, yeah, we got basically populists versus the institutionalism of democratic republic as we used to know it that isn't functioning the way it used to. And both of them have their downsides because the institutional republic has held on to too long this sort of elite system that isn't fair. And then you've got these populist movements, and unfortunately, like you said, they didn't pick Bernie, and so they're going elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think they know. Obviously, we could do multiple hours on this, but just like getting under the surface of some of the topics we've talked about before, where Middle America, geographic Middle America, economic middle class, are all kind of in this. Not to be so generalizing, but there are tendencies and there are trends for folks to kind of wonder what the future looks like, because the preservation of the institutions seem to take precedence over acknowledging that there are people that need recalibration of the metrics to support and be more in alignment with the values of having the set of policies that really solve the problems that people are facing, or at least the leadership to say this is what we intend to do, as opposed to the divisiveness. And I know that I didn't say this earlier, but the cultural issues that are electioneering professionals, political professionals, they are very highly capable of finding those points of contention that divide us the most, and that I don't know, inspire is not the right word, but excite the passions. And so many of our issues are cultural issues that for the sake of like we've talked about, building the team, exciting the base, getting the voter turnout, and that so what we end up with is a two-party system where the parties themselves are focused on elections and power, and what seems to be left behind is consensus building, deliberation, actually, trying to persuade people. Persuasion is a lost art. We're fighting over that last, like we're saying, hey, there's a 5-seat margin, in the House, or there's a 1-seat margin in the Senate. Which states can move that margin? Well, if that's really what we're focusing on, then we're leaving behind a vast majority of the people for attention at the time when elections show up. So it's no wonder that the demagogues and the most extreme people get the most attention because of the most funding, because of the most, not to use a big word, but they exacerbate the problem. They accentuate the differences.
Yeah, but again, it's even where you go to the ideological. I mean, when I was in college, I studied intellectual conservatism. Edmund Burke, was sort of the foundational of conservatism, the necessity of the prejudice of institutionalism, that you don't rid yourself of long-held institutions, at least not right away, because you could be tearing an organ out and you don't know what the long-term effects of it are. Even slavery, for instance, you can't just instantaneously end it, or you'll get what happened in the Caribbean. He just says you have to gradually change things. That was his big take. And you had William F. Buckley and people arguing for gradual change, and you had Irving Kristol, who had once been a socialist, talking about you had this intellectualism in there. But recently, when I was trying to find anybody who would defend the Eileen Cannon, who is just gone what appears to be all out corrupt on the Trump classified documents trial. I mean, I tried to see if I could find a conservative legal scholar who would defend her. And I went through all of the conservative magazines, Human Events, American Spectator, commentary, as I just mentioned, of course, National Review, which I've given up on for a long time. I mean, it's just a tabloid now. I mean, all of these these used to be pillars of conservative intellectualism, and I couldn't find any. I could not find, even Alan Dershowitz has gone quiet, and I could not find a defender of her. But while I was there, I was reading some of these articles, and I wondered where the scholarship went. It's the conservative intellectualism is dead. I mean, it's just tabloid stuff, grist for red meat stuff. If you want to say something real quickly, then we got to go to predictions.
No, I think this is a bigger issue that will be taken up in the near term. So I'll revisit it down the road.
We will take this up. All right. I got to get something for my prediction here.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
This one's a pretty quick and easy one. Last night we had a primary in Maryland, and former Republican Governor Larry Hogan, he easily won his party's nomination, and he was very popular. He got a lot of support across, the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. So people think that there's a potential for him to win over the Senate seat that's being left behind opened up by Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, because he's retiring. Well, it turns out that Democrat Angela also Brooks, she won her very contentious Democratic primary. And so the question is, will the Democrats hold that state, or is the media narrative that there's a potential for Republicans to flip that state? My prediction is that that's not the case, that Maryland is still strongly a Democratic state. And so I predict that Angela also Brooks will become the first Black senator from Maryland, and that she would be the only Black female senator, because the LaFonza Butler from California is stepping down. So this is it's a solid win for the Senate to have a representative voice, a diverse representative voice.
Well, we're going to have to put a bet on this, and this is a bet I really hope I'm going to lose, because I am predicting Larry Hogan is very popular because he's an iconoclast. He's not really beholden to the Republican majority party. He would actually stand up to his majority, and he's got a reputation in the state for that, and he's going to make it a point to not associate with Trump, to actually attack Trump throughout the campaign. I'm predicting that he's actually going to win it, but it's not necessarily going to be the best thing for the Republicans because he will break with them. But I'm actually predicting that Larry Hogan will win it. We will find out, though. I hope I'm wrong, but we will find out. And until the next time, stay informed and stay engaged.